tonight, January 18th, 2021, first P&Z meeting of the year, and we would like to convene. The first item on the agenda is the consideration of the minutes. Since the mail didn't run today, nobody got their copy. We just put it back to the next meeting. Is there any public comment?
No.
Okay. Next item is discussion of a zoning change in the conservation district.
Gentlemen, I just want to let you know, Joey Groves approached me about an area down on Broad Street, which is down by the Jehovah's Witness Church that is currently for sale. He said there's some zoning in there that is considered conservation. He thinks it should not be conservation in the area that he's talking, and that is where the church is sitting. And right in front of the church, there's a lot right there. And that conservation line goes right up in between that. I mean, it just splits that house and it runs right into that church property too. It splits the church. So he said, Gary, conservation is primarily there's some frontage and some situations in there. I went ahead and just looked something up today so that I would be able to read this to you. What I was looking at is under 1377.02, these are uses permitted as special exceptions. In the district, all uses shall be permitted only authorized as a special exception by the Planning and Zoning Commission and subject to general standards listed below. Commercial forest, tree nursery, conservation uses game preservance or preserve, animal grazing lands, recreation use, single family detached dwellings provided, and then under that, which is F, there's a sub 1, 2, and 3. The lot contains a minimum frontage of 250 feet and a minimum area of 3 acres. There is a minimum setback of 50 feet, and the slope does not exceed 25%. So he said, Gary, he says, all of that would be fine in there. I don't know about the 3 acres for sure. That's something we'd have to look up. But I wanted to just bring it to your attention because he asked us to take a look at that. I think I spoke to Craig about this, and I think he wants to say something on this.
Well, we'll really just have to refer this back to the BZAA because that will come into their category now, and then they make their decision, which comes back to us or the council to make the final decision. If you're going to change get a special exception. Is that correct?
Well, I think for a special exception, it would have to go to the BZA. Now, a zoning change, I don't know if that goes to the BZA or if that's just our body as far as a zoning change. Now, for a special exception in a particular zone, I think that would have to go to the BZA. So, if we weren't to change the zone, and somebody wanted to do something they had to have an exception for, they'd have to go to the BZA for that.
And go through the proper steps.
Right.
Right.
But as far as changing the zone, I don't feel like it would be this body that would change the zone.
Yeah.
Or move the zone lines.
Right.
We can do that, correct? Like it's still, the conservation is a pretty large area, but we have to move a line back. Would that be something we do, or does that go to the BZA? I mean, council has to find it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
I would think any zoning change would happen in this body
Yeah.
and would get referred to council.
Well, let's get a clarification on what they want.
Okay.
Then we'll know what we're doing.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll get back with Joe on that, and then we will go maybe to Greg too and just get clarification exactly on what all we have to do. Okay.
Can we jump up one and do the chairman?
Sure, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, I'm going to go to the election of the chairman for this body. The reason being, with my new position as a county commissioner, I don't feel like I should chair this committee. I would like to stay on it if at all possible. So, but I don't feel like I should share that. I should be more involved in the county like this. So I would like to call right now for nominations of the chairman.
I'd like to make a motion that we move Brandon Waters as chair.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'll second Brandon.
Okay, we have a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, you're the new guy.
Did you say aye?
I didn't say.
You didn't
I
say.
thought, are we going to discuss it or anything?
Oh,
Yeah, let's call this up.
How do you feel about it?
I mean, I'm open to it, I just, you know, I mean, there's a lot going on, work and everything, I mean, as long as I have enough time to put into it. I don't want to get in a situation where I don't have enough time to put into it, and I feel like I'm not doing what I should be doing. But, you know, until that happens, I can do it for a year. I think we have to nominate and do it on a yearly basis.
Yeah, I think that's what precedence was set 2 years ago. When did you?
At least.
Yeah.
Maybe longer. Sir, you
But I would be completely open to anybody else wanting to try it. Also,
What about the other members?
I'm fine either way.
Okay.
Members that are not here would be Jimmy.
Jimmy,
Clint?
Clint would be,
Clint's going to be resigning, I believe.
Yeah.
Clint is going to have to, he's going to kind of be a legal advisor, but he won't be on the board.
What about Jimmy? Does Jimmy have any interest?
You can ask. Want to
Like I
table
said,
it?
like I said, if nobody has any interest, I mean, I'll do it. I've done it before, so if nobody has any interest, but if another member has interest in doing it, that's completely fine with me as well.
You want to table it till we talk to Jimmy?
Be okay.
Then if Jimmy doesn't have any interest, then we still want
Do you have any interest?
to.
Make sure we don't have to talk to two people.
But yeah, if Jimmy doesn't have any interest, that's fine.
You have any?
I'll do one.
No,
Okay.
this time.
Yeah.
You want to call him or just say?
Just table it.
Okay.
We need a motion to do that.
If he doesn't have any interest, will we come back and vote it, or do we?
Well, I think if he does not have any interest, we'll have to come back and do it again. Vote again.
So like I said, that's fine. If he doesn't have any interest, I won't leave it hanging, that's fine. But if he has interest, I'm open to that too.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Okay, Gary, turn it over to you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is introduction to the comprehensive plan. It's a video presented by Dr. Margaret Stout of WVU. It's about 42 minutes long, and she's got a PowerPoint that's going to be on here. But basically, this is the new norm for all the professors at WVU, sitting in front of a screen and speaking, and it's sort of the new norm. So I think she does a very nice job, and it's very informative, and I think it'll help us moving forward as we head into these elements. Matter of fact, I told her I would have liked to have had this a while back, because I thought there was some pretty good stuff in here. But so without further ado, Dr. Margaret Stout, who right now is currently in Arizona living and teaching WVU from Arizona, since they're not allowed in class. So this is straight from Arizona. She did this.
Hello, My name is Margaret Stout, and I am an associate professor of public administration at West Virginia University. I've had the great pleasure over the last year and a half to work with the city of Summersville on a series of service learning courses that one of the deliverables that came from that team's work is an updated draft of the City of Summersville Comprehensive Plan, which is Comprehensive Plan 2030. So, things with the pandemic did not go as we had hoped or planned in terms of participatory planning events in the community. This is just, the nature of 2020 as it's been. So what I'm hoping to do today is just give you all as planning commissioners an introduction to what comprehensive plans are about. I don't want to overwhelm you with tons of information, but if we get a good start on this, then maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into the details of your actual draft comprehensive plan. So I'm just going to go through a series of slides here, and I'm recording, so hopefully I can easily share this recording for your next planning commission meeting. Let me see if this is even going to work. There we go. So one of the important things, I'm trying to get rid of this navigation bar. All right, technology. So one of the first questions that most people ask is, why do we need a comprehensive plan? Like, what is this about? And essentially, any municipality in the state of West Virginia, by law, if you have a zoning ordinance with the city, which the city of Summersville does, you must have a comprehensive plan that guides that ordinance. So this really applies to any local government, so a county or a municipality, but I'm going to gear this, towards a city in terms of framing for today's presentation. So the difference in these two related functions is that zoning ordinances are laws, right? They are enforced with the city's police power. You can require things that by law must be followed, or there will be legal ramifications. Comprehensive plans, on the other hand, are policies. So these are stated, goals, objectives, strategies that the city will use to guide decision making. For example, if you review zoning ordinances, these policies should sort of guide what those ordinances look like. It can guide things like tax incentives or development fee incentives, things that sort of financially support development in your community or guide development in one direction or another. And then ultimately, it should guide the planning commission, city staff, and ultimately the city council in making development decisions. And that includes the requests that you might get for variances to the zoning ordinance. So this relationship is traditionally, the horse before the cart, right? We want to have comprehensive plan policies in place before we develop zoning ordinances. However, in many communities in the state of West Virginia, that was reversed. People adopted zoning ordinances without comprehensive plans. This state code 8A11 was added to the code, I believe it was somewhere around 2009, that required all municipalities or counties that had zoning ordinances to develop and adopt a comprehensive plan. within 5 years. And so it may be that the city of Summersville's previous plan was developed in response to that requirement. The history is just a little bit sketchy in terms of how that went down. So that's kind of what we assumed going into this planning process. So what a comprehensive plan is, or what it's supposed to do, is guide an approach to community planning that considers all aspects of quality of life, so physical, social, and economic concerns. And quoting from the code itself, I really like this. They're basically saying, hey, a good quality of life is what local governing bodies should be pursuing. Like this is sort of the job of the city. And so you can't have that quality of life without attending to all three of those concerns, right? What is the environment like? What is the social fabric and infrastructure that supports quality of life? And how do you strengthen the economy to continue and sustain that quality of life? So together, all three of those types of elements create a strategic plan for the city. And as you know, the city's a corporation, right? It's like a business plan for the community. So it's made up of, just like any other strategic plan, goals, objectives, and strategies, and generally includes narrative discussion of those items, supported by maps, definitely. But sometimes other types of diagrams or photos or images that help bring that narrative to life in some way. So the elements that are required in the state code are listed here. It's not that each one has to be on its own. You can combine things as long as you're covering all of the issues that fall under these categories of concern. So we used a slightly different arrangement of these things or titles of these things, going from the previous draft of the comprehensive plan, but it does meet the state requirements in terms of covering all of these topics. So these plans are designed to be long range. Generally speaking, they're laid out for 10 years in advance. We were doing this work in 2020, and that's why we've labeled the draft plan 2030, right? However, you don't wait 10 years typically to update them. Most communities schedule a regular planned update process every 5 years or so. But sometimes it has to be a little bit more frequent than that because things change, right? You might have a precipitating event that changes the conditions in the community and therefore requires different goals, objectives, or strategies. So I know that in Summersville, there's been recent floods that really caused a need primarily for the school district to do some new planning and facilities plans, et cetera. But it also might be that new industry emerges or a very large employer arrives and really changes the housing needs, for example, in the community. And then other times there's just simple demographic changes, communities age, young folk tend to leave West Virginia in large numbers, so we're seeing that trend in recent decades in the state. So it may be that every 5 years isn't enough. You might come up against a change in your community's conditions that require you to revisit that comprehensive plan a little bit sooner. So what I do recommend is that the Planning Commission get itself on a schedule. So 5 years from now, really 4 years from now, you should start the planning process so that you can do that update within the course of that year. So both the state law as well as best practices, right? So if you talk with certified planners, what they will recommend is that you involve the citizenry in this planning process. Now, I know that you might say to yourselves, well, that's what the Planning Commission is for, right? And that's true, but you really need to reach beyond appointed citizen advisory bodies and get to a larger range of residents and property owners and business owners. So you are required under the code to host a series of public hearings. And that starts with the planning commission and ultimately then goes to the city council for formal adoption. But I definitely recommend engaging stakeholders in all phases. So starting with very broad visioning, getting into more detailed planning, and then going through that formal adoption process. So we had planned to do that sort of public engagement and had things scheduled for March of this year. And of course, literally, I think it was a matter of maybe 5 days before our planned trips to Summersville, we were shut down and locked down on campus. So we did try to do as much as we could through Zoom and virtual discussions. Some of you may have met Reed Bowden, who was an intern from the Master of Public Administration program, who was there last summer. And he was ultimately able to hold one sort of invitational session with a group of folk in July. And I think he presented the draft plan and talked a little bit about what the different elements were seeking. So I wasn't privy to the results of that really. So I'm not sure that maybe some of you participated in that. So you're kind of in a situation where it would be advisable to do a little bit more, right? To do some public education, enable some feedback opportunities from residents and property owners and business owners before you move to the formal consideration through public hearings at Planning Commission and then at City Council. So the who, you want a range of people involved in creating the comprehensive plan or updating it. Professional planners obviously are really helpful because they bring technical expertise. They understand the political process and the state laws that guide that process, and generally also have some facilitation expertise for engaging the public. But really, the drivers of a comprehensive plan should be the residents. It's the people who live in your community who really have an experiential understanding of what's going on. They live it. And so they're going to have the clearest idea of what is needed to increase that quality of life in your community. And what sort of drives me in public engagement is that this is sort of a democratic right. It's the notion that we should have a say in the future of our community, which affects our day-to-day quality of life. And also to have a deeper understanding of what's expected of us as residents. Because there are things in comprehensive plans that require engagement of everyone. Just like everybody needs to follow traffic laws to keep things safe and smooth for everyone. There are things that we have to do as citizens in a city or a town to help achieve the goals and objectives that we collectively have identified. And then of course, the city can't do everything on its own. And so you do need to have organizational stakeholders involved. And there are folk, from banks and from development, construction companies or engineering firms or, all manner of expertise that would have something to do with elements in your comprehensive plan. And so bringing those potential collaborators and partners on board through the planning process gives, not only added technical expertise to the development of the plan, but sort of buy-in and engagement and participation participation as different aspects of the plan are implemented. So the comp plan for Summersville 2030 has these different elements, and you could think of them as chapters. Element is just sort of plannerese for the sections of the plan. You can call them whatever you like. I just use sort of, typical planning language. So natural resources covers aspects of the environmental concerns, but also this rural character concern that the state code calls for. Cultural and historic resources covers the historic preservation requirement. Land use and design combines aspects of the rural character, as well as how land is actually used, which is really the primary foundation for your zoning ordinance. Transportation and circulation covers the transportation requirement of the state for multimodal consideration, which means you're not just planning for cars and vehicles, but also for pedestrians and bicyclists, and folks in any type of mobility assistance vehicle, a wheelchair, a motorized scooter, this sort of stuff. Public services and utilities covers the infrastructure requirements and public service requirements of the state. Civic facilities is not something that that's specifically called out in the code, but it's something that's really important for the municipality as a business, because you own property, you manage property, for both, operational concerns as well as community use. So I think that that's a valuable addition. Parks and recreation covers the parks requirement in the code. Housing, same thing. Economic development, same thing. And plan implementation really covers the requirement to explain the financing. How is it that you are going to have the both economic and technical resources necessary to execute the strategies that are described in the plan. So these are all the detailed elements that Comprehensive Plan 2030 has in place to ensure that you are meeting the requirements that are written into the state code. So getting into what do those things mean, right? Not only how are we meeting the requirements, but what's actually in the content there. The natural resources element really talks about that rural character and how it's going to be protected, either in or around the city limits. And it also addresses the natural environment as something that needs to support both human and wildlife use. And how that space, those open spaces or natural spaces, are related to land uses and transportation infrastructure. So it's sort of like, other plans may be called open space, the open space element. But because of the nature in West Virginia of extractive industries, it needs to be sort of a little bit broader typically. The cultural and historic resources element speaks directly to ways to preserve and enhance historic and cultural resources in the community. And you have, some really strong assets, especially in the downtown. So that sort of goes along with the natural environment of really calling out things that you want to preserve in terms of character, buildings, and sites. Land use and design, as I said, is the backbone of your zoning ordinance, and it should describe how every single parcel of land within the jurisdictional boundaries will be used, and any sort of design requirements that need to be written into zoning code or design review guidelines for development. When you look at a given parcel, you also have to consider its relationship to what's going on around it. So other parcels, what public infrastructure is available that serves that parcel, the transportation infrastructure, again, around and serving that parcel. So, this is where the importance of GIS maps comes into play, because you really need to be able to look at every specific parcel and code it in a way that makes sense, considering all of those other concerns. So this land use and design element is probably probably your priority in terms of things that you might want to do to change your zoning ordinance. Integrated closely with land use is transportation and circulation concerns. Because, if you have people using land, you have to get them to and from that parcel. So this element covers all of the multiple modes of ways of getting around, of moving people and vehicles to and through the areas in question. And again, you really have to look at that relationship between what type of a street is this based on the land uses that are adjacent to it. So there's a lot of interconnectivity between the land use element and the transportation and circulation element. The public services and utilities element is all about everything, all of that infrastructure stuff, as well as public safety services that the city provides. So fire and police can be covered within that element. Obviously, there are things that utilities that are provided to the community that the city does not own or control. But there are issues around rights of way, for example, and ways to collaborate with those utility providers for things like undergrounding of utilities, or at least coordinating efforts so that you're not constantly, redigging up streets or sidewalks to accommodate activities with water, sewer, and natural gas, for example. So this is an element that really does speak to the need to collaborate with private sector entities to implement what you desire in terms of those public services. And you have a unique situation with the ownership of the hydroelectric power production. Gosh, the dams power production unit. So you have sort of a unique situation in that Somersville has a business interest in that facility, and not too long, I think within the horizon of the 2030 target date, I believe you're going to be taking full ownership of that. So this is something that really can be expanded in terms of what the business plan is for that facility. Can be included in this comprehensive plan. As I said, the civic, the civic facilities element is there to address any property or buildings that are owned by the city, whether it's for its own operations or for community use. So it's important, you have community centers, you have the civic center, you have places like Brown Oaks. These are facilities that should be called out with specific purposes and strategies for maintaining them and sustaining them over time. Closely related to the public facilities is parks and recreation. So this would include both the actual space, like green space, but the facilities or equipment that is installed in the parks, as well as any programs that you might operate or might operate in collaboration with other organizations. So, I think about, while it's the county park, you think about the ways in which the extension service at WVU partners, through 4-H with the county to maintain and operate programs within the county's park. So cities can do the same type of thing, right? I've seen cities partner with YMCAs to own and manage and deliver services through community center facilities, that sort of thing. So this is something that the city hasn't done a lot with in the past, sort of the Washington County parks, et cetera. But it's something that you can certainly move into doing more of in the future. And sort of best practices for parks is to make sure that every neighborhood has access to public park space without having to cross a major arterial, so that children and families can safely navigate their way to that park. The housing element really addresses four main concerns when it comes to housing policy in a city. First of all, the availability of housing itself, the structures and the types of structures that are available to residents. But from there, there should be policies that guide how to ensure the adequacy of those facilities, the affordability of those housing facilities, and how accessible they are in terms of ownership or renting. And so, sort of fair housing policies come into that last piece. The economic development element is often probably the second most important if you want to prioritize these in terms of your attention to them, because this is where we discuss opportunities for businesses that provide both needed goods and services, that make the quality of life what it is, but also employment opportunities or business ownership opportunities. And ultimately, this is where the city's coffers are funded. You don't get a lot of property tax, and the way that our state's tax structure is set up, the B&O tax is a primary revenue source for the city. So increasing business activity is, of course, very critical to maintain the services that the city provides. So the last element is the most unfinished element, because this is sort of beyond our capacity. The plan implementation element is designed primarily to address this issue of financing. So it's all well and good to have a strategic plan with a beautiful vision and wonderful goals and objectives and strategies that are fantastic, right? And exciting and compelling, but ultimately you have to be able to put together the financial and technical resources necessary to execute them. So this is something that really does need more development. It also covers, who's responsible in a large sense for implementing the strategies. So anywhere that there needs to be sort of partnerships involved with executing things, you need to talk about how those things come to be. This element also provides information about how the plan itself is administered. So generally speaking, we see professional planners in larger cities who work with the Planning Commission with their sort of policy guidance. Together, the planner and the commission make recommendations to the city council. And then, as land use decisions are being made, any contestation of those decisions based on what the policy guidance is in the comprehensive plan, that still goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And I would say kind of a rule of thumb is if you are getting a lot of contested planning and zoning decisions that are going to the Board of Zoning Appeals about a particular issue, let's say parking requirements, that is a really good indicator to you that something needs to be adjusted in terms of comprehensive plan policy, and then something needs to be adjusted in your zoning ordinance. But that's the order of events, okay? You don't just go change the zoning ordinance. You need to have a policy that clearly states why you would change the zoning ordinance in that way. So we're trying to get you back to the horse pulling the cart instead of the cart before the horse, if you will. So the next steps that I would recommend that you take is to dive deep into each of these elements of the comprehensive plan. I think it's important to learn and understand the reasoning behind each goal, objective, and strategy that we've recommended. A lot of research and a lot of experience has gone into those recommendations. I need to say, very clearly, I am not a certified planner, but I am a citizen planner. I've had tremendous amounts of experience in crafting general plans. That's what we call them in Arizona, which is where I am right now. 3 different major updates and changes to the general plan in the city of Tempe. As well as a number of specific area plans. And that was in my previous career as an executive director of a community development corporation. So I do have a pretty good sense of what, makes for good policies and a comprehensive plan. And the graduate students under my guidance did a tremendous amount of research on each goal, objective, and strategy that's in that draft. So it is your plan, and you should make adjustments to that plan according to your understanding of the community's vision and desires. But I don't want you to just have knee-jerk reactions to those recommendations and just say, oh, we can't have anything about a historic district in there. Let's have at least one conversation. That's I do ask for that because sometimes if you understand where that recommendation comes from a little bit more deeply, it may be that some slighter, more minor adjustment can be made to have it fit better with what you're looking for. Rather than just sort of deleting it out, completely. The other thing that I would recommend, sorry about that. The other thing that I would recommend is that you create some sort of public engagement plan and execute that. Now, you do have the required public hearings before the Planning Commission. But if there's anything that you can do before those hearings to engage the public, at least educate them, provide more information about what's in the plan and why it's there, and any opportunities that you can create for feedback, get the plan draft out there, circulating, use your website, use the cable channel, that sort of thing. And maybe use surveys of some type to allow people to give their feedback. As much that you can manage to do along those lines prior to your public hearings, I think the stronger your outcome's going to be. And I don't mean this just to get sort of the rubber stamp approval or the so-called buy-in so that nobody shows up at the public hearings to, argue against the plan or that sort of thing. I mean, obviously you want those things. But I think what's more important is, as I said at the beginning, the city cannot execute this comprehensive plan by itself. You need the partnership and collaboration of your residents, of your property owners, and your business owners. So the more that you bring them into this deliberative process, the more they are going to feel that sense of responsibility for helping the city execute the plan. So it's really for that reason that I recommend that you try your best to engage the public in this deliberation. So there are some resources that are available to you. I do know that Gary has reached out to the WVU Land Use and Sustainable Development Law Clinic. They have very limited availability because of the demand. I mean, they're excellent, they're fantastic at what they do, and therefore they are in great demand. So I'm not sure that the timeline that you're traveling is going to work with theirs, but If you have some specific need for expertise or advice or counsel on a particular issue, you might approach the faculty and staff of the clinic individually and request, sort of, legal counsel, for lack of a better term. They are attorneys and they are certified planners. The other resource available to you would be the WVU Extension Service. There is a unit called Community Resources and Economic Development. And within that unit, Michael Doherty is an extension specialist that has been on the Planning Commission in his community for decades at this point. He has a lot of expertise in local government finance, and as well as comprehensive planning. So he's somebody that I would definitely tap, especially for help on sorting out how to flesh out the plan implementation element. I think it can be incredibly valuable to you in that way. Other WVU faculty, we have many colleges that address different aspects. I mean, there are engineers that address the public infrastructure stuff, and so on and so forth. Use your contacts within the Extension Service. You've got a wonderful office there. Lauren Weatherford has been an important part of this activity as a student in the graduate certificate program. And she is a really great sort of liaison, if you will, to help you find people that have the expertise that you need. And then, of course, there's always private consulting firms. The one thing that I would caution against is trying to use an engineering firm to do this type of planning. They have skills in particular areas, like the public infrastructure, for example, or transportation and circulation, et cetera. But they don't often have planners with a wide range of expertise to cover all of the different elements within the plan. So fit your experts, right, well to the different elements where you need some additional guidance or knowledge building, okay? So the things that I can do to help, my expertise is in just specific areas, just like any other faculty member. I could definitely go through each element with maybe, not just the planning commissioners, but maybe identify a group of stakeholders that are most interested in any particular element. And we can do some public education through Zoom sessions. I can do recorded webinars like this that could be delivered on the city website or the cable station. And this is, that whole process of trying to do some public education around why those goals, objectives, and strategies are being recommended. So, that sort of deep dive process that I was talking about. The other thing that I have expertise in is public engagement. I could help you design some strategies, not just the education component, but the other side of garnering feedback. Clearly, in pandemic conditions, probably the easiest way to do this is going to be some sort of written survey. It's not the best approach, but when you can't easily convene open houses and that sort of thing, listening sessions, I think that's probably going to be the best bet until we're all inoculated and safe to convene and gather again. And then, whatever feedback comes in from the community, I could definitely help you analyze that feedback in terms of matching it up with where changes might be called for in the draft comp plan. So those are all things that I can offer as a consultant. I don't have a lot of time to just volunteer this sort of thing for people. and I've talked with Gary about that before. It's just a necessity, and as faculty, we're on contract for 9 months out of the year, and so we're sort of on our own for the other 3 months in terms of sorting out income revenue. So I would be happy to engage with you on any of these types of activities, and I think that's really what I can do going forward. So that is what I've got for you. And what I will do is go ahead and send the PowerPoint slide to Gary if you want those separate from this recording. And I apologize for any sort of whatever technical difficulties trying to use this virtual background, etc. It's kind of strange. But I really hope that you're able to move forward with some of those recommended next steps. And I do hope that I get to work with you a little bit further on it. It's a plan that we all worked really, really hard on. And I feel very committed to seeing Summersville move ahead in this way. And I'm very, very excited for your community as this sort of statewide initiative goes forward with outdoor recreation and tourism. You are so well positioned for what's coming ahead. So I guess that's it. And if you guys want to reach back out to me with specific questions, I'm sure you're gonna, continue with your meeting and have a discussion now. If you want to reach back out to me with specific questions, I'll do my best to answer them. All right. Thank you very much, and have a good meeting.
Okay. Sorry we didn't have any popcorn for that. Yeah. Could use some, couldn't? I thought she did a really nice job. She certainly opened my eyes up to a lot of things in there. I just want you to know that, especially I think it's important the commission knows that I have not entered into any kind of agreement with Dr. Stout. I appreciate her, opening up and saying that she would if we wanted to do some consulting. Along with that consulting comes a bill, comes a fee. And one thing that I have done is, and it's under some of her recommendations, was to reach out to our extension office. And our extension office does have Mike. She mentioned Mike's name in there, who does a really good job with a lot of this. And they have committed, and it's the only thing I've committed to so far, they've committed to helping us work through the elements. And some of those people will be Mike that Dr. Stout mentioned. And, really, they want to make sure that as we go through, and I think an element a night, if you will, have somebody available to answer any questions. And I'll probably have to get with Jason over there and talk to him, because the extension employees are not allowed to enter into a meeting like we have here. They're not permitted to do that, but they can certainly join us via Zoom, and we just need to set that up, or at least maybe how we used to call in with the telephone. But I think Zoom is what their preference is. We could do that, couldn't we? Easily enough. And he would basically, or she would be available via Zoom while we're going through the process. And when the question comes up, we can refer to them and they can help us through that. And right now, I think that's a really good option. Unless somebody else has a better option, I think that's probably our best bet. They will do all that scheduling. As a matter of fact, May 1st, I believe, is that a Monday? I believe it is. May 1st would be the first one that they have set up. Or not May. No, not May 1st. I'm not going to think. March 1st. March 1st. Sorry about that. March 1st would be the first one they have set up for us. And so what we'd have to do is be prepared to come in and discuss element 1, and they would be available to us to go through it with us. Do you all have any other suggestions, any better suggestions? I struggled initially. I said I divided it up into pairs, but ultimately I think at the end of the day, this commission as a whole is going to be responsible for the whole comprehensive plan, and I was concerned that how engaged, for example, myself would be if Jim and Brandon had element 3 and I came to the meeting listening to them and not as prepared. So this way I would be prepared for every element as everybody. And if somebody was to come up and ask you about something, you'd be, pretty in tune to exactly what was going on if everybody went through every element.
Yeah, I think we should probably counsel in the wisdom of many, so I think it probably behooves us for everybody to throw in their recommendations, comments as you go along, suggestions
I think so.
on each element that we do pair thing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. And as I spoke to the extension, who has all the experience, that was one of their suggestions. They said, Gary, I think,
Yeah.
and Jim, I think maybe we've talked about this a little bit in the way out in the past when this thing was first starting. Sometimes you read that and I was finding myself saying, well, they know what they're doing. They must have put it in there for a reason. But we need to know what that reason is, and we need explanations on those reasons. So we are doing what's best, because ultimately it's Summersville's plan, and I think that that's something we really need to. And somehow, I'll probably sit down with Jason again. We got to talk about, and with the SCTV, we got to talk about how we're going to get this word out and get local engagement, because we're going to need that. And I'm like her. I don't think it should be where they come in and we offer up. I think there's a time to disagree, but during these working sessions, I think it's more about, let's work through it and work through it together. And we do need the public comment on that. We need their help on that, because it's ultimately it's their town, it's their city. We're here to help them and to guide it through. But I want to hear from the people. And how do we get that word out? It's got to be through social media, I would think, along through, other options. Word of mouth too, but we've got to be out there talking about it. Your thoughts?
I agree.
Okay.
I think social media is a way to engage the public, try to get them interested in this.
You got anything, Craig?
Well, I think in the implement part of it, do you think there's grants out there to do some of these things that they've come up with and things like that?
Grants to handle consulting fees?
Well, that,
Just
consulting
plan.
fees, but also when you start implementing the plan, like the low-speed car pass and
Yes.
things like that, is there grants that are going to cover those things?
That's a great question, Craig, and the answer to that is yes, there are grants. We just went through 5 projects with WVU. Some of us even sat on some of those projects. I think Jim was on, you were on one, wasn't you? We sat in on some of those projects, and there are some grant monies. And as a matter of fact, you're starting to see a little bit of it with the sidewalks. The city recently got a grant for some of that work toward planning, some of the engineer work, I should say. There was a grant done for that that was announced to the city council. So there are some grants. Will they cover everything? Probably not. But at the end of the day, I think we should have a complete and total plan. I mean, not just a plan what we want to see happen, but how do we pay for that too? And as I read through, like the last comprehensive plan that the city put through, it was sort of generic. And I can see a lot of this plan coming to fruition down the road. Not all of it, but that's the ultimate plan. You want to put a plan together that you can work through and make happen. So, yeah, I think there are some grants out there. And that's where I think the extension will really help us. They're going to know where you're going to get some of that stuff. Yeah.
And there's probably going to be some job grants and things coming up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else? Anything else?
can we set a March 1 for the next meeting? Is that,
What was that for?
huh? February. What is March? Let's see, what's February? It's a Monday. February. That's the first one. they have.
Oh,
I'm
it's 2
sorry.
weeks,
What's that?
so that's 2 weeks.
Yeah. Can we be ready to discuss the first element?
Well, you're going to look to Extension Service to provide some input in this, right?
Yeah, they're going to be here for the meeting. Probably via Zoom.
On February 1,
Yeah.
they can do that. I don't have any problem with that.
Do we do Zoom on a big like that?
Your thoughts?
So you just need to contact the extension.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I'll reach out to them, confirm it all with them, and then I'll reach out to the commission and let them know it's confirmed. I'll do that tomorrow. So tentatively, we are set for February 1.
Anything from anybody else? Do we hear a motion to adjourn? Motion carries. Go on.